My name is Christina Digiulio. I'm also known as PK out in the social media world, I guess it would be, and in activism world. I am from Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is the western side of Philadelphia, and we call it Southeastern Pennsylvania, hence the name of our group, which is Watchdogs of Southeastern Pennsylvania, or WASIPA. And that is a friend of mine, co-founder. I'm a co-founder. My friend Laura Snyder is the other co-founder, and she is in Delaware County, which is also on the western side. Our counties meet up with each other, and we started this because of the Mariner East Pipeline Project, or also called the Pennsylvania Pipeline Project, which is interesting that they called it that. And it came through all the way from southwestern Pennsylvania, actually Ohio, and through Pennsylvania, 350 miles, ending in Marcus Hook, which is, in Chester, Pennsylvania. It's a Delaware County, and it gets confusing because I'm Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is completely separate from Chester City, which is in Delaware County and on the Delaware River, which has a lot. It's a huge environmental justice area, and it's hugely infiltrated by industry, especially the petrochemical or the petroleum refining industry. And Marcus Hook is a really gigantic refinery, historically not as old as the PES refinery that we all heard of, which exploded in Philadelphia. But Marcus Hook is like now the new petrochemical, huge storage hub. And our pipeline ended or terminated there, and we're transporting in this. It's fracked gas. Obviously, this is liquefied fracked gas, which is from the wet Marcellus. Southwestern Pennsylvania is wet Marcellus, and that means it has other products that comes up in the ground, which is not just the methane, which we call natural gas. As a chemist, I am a local chemist, and so I really do not like the propaganda language that we have kind of become accustomed to calling it natural gas. It's not natural. It naturally is under the ground. So if it was natural, it would be still under the ground, not up here, the way we're doing it by fracking, hydraulic fracturing. So what comes out in southwestern Pennsylvania, wet Marcellus, is also butane, propane, and ethane, which ethane is that major cash crop in the petrochemical industry, which we also have heard of the ethylene cracker plant from Shell. They're using the same hydrocarbon, I call them, which that's what they are. The ethane is being, cracked, and they're making like polyethylene, which is like a precursor. So basically ethane is a feedstock to petrochemical plastics, petroplastics. Mariner East is supposedly first large scale pipeline that was created to transport this across state and ending in Marcus Hook. But the difference between our pipeline versus Falcon and the Shell cracker plant is that it does not stay in Pennsylvania. It doesn't stay in the country. It's being shipped out by Ineos, which is going out to Norway, Sweden area, the UK, to do the same thing, to crack the molecule and, make polyethylene. Currently, we also have a polypropylene, same thing, cracker plant in Marcus Hook, which is rarely talked about, which we also transport propane in our pipeline, the Mariner East pipeline, and as well butane at some points. So they have 3 gigantic World War II caves down there, and they store it under the ground. Old caves, they store a lot of this product, and it is slated for the hydrogen hub as well to start storing hydrogen in there. So this is a system that I've been fighting. And why did I create WASIPA? Is because it's really hard when we're in encapsulated fights to stop a major system, because they're so powerful. They're 10, 15 years ahead of us, even with my science and the science that I rely on for evidence to help validate people's, health harms or property damage harms or water harms has no weight, which is really frustrating because there's a truth to it. We have a constitutional amendment to protect these things in Pennsylvania, and it still seems that is not even weighed as something important. According to this. And I started realizing it's the system that we're fighting. And once they invest in one part of the system, it is really hard to stop the entire system unless we create a system that is all across the board, communicating, talking, gathering samples across the entire scale of the project or system. So that's why, WASIPA, we kind of love watching the Shell cracker plant folks, the eyes on Shell. And I never created WASIPA. I've been doing this for 6 years, 7 years now. I didn't have WASIPA. I just had me. That's PK Diddy. And I was running around being crazy, taking videos, Facebook Live, everything, because I had to keep my cameras on them. And as soon as I kept cameras on, it's Energy Transfer for the Mariner East. It's a company that is doing it, formerly known as Sunoco. They would put walls up. They would, when I took my drone up to take pictures to help residents, they would put a tent up so I couldn't see what they were doing. One of the processes they were using was called horizontal directional drilling, which also comes from the fracking world. And horizontal directional drilling is basically used also for like water pipelines to avoid going, going under rivers. So they do use it to get through bedrock under rivers. Yet the petroleum or oil and gas industry, pipeline industry is loving it because they can go through population dense areas and just like kind of go underneath us 125 to 200 feet, even less than that, 50 feet. So it goes in a U underneath us and comes back up in another area. So there's a two bore pits, one on one end, one on the other, and then they'll like trench for another 100 feet or something and then do it again to go underneath another feature. They have been going under wetlands. So the way they push this project is, and this is one of the largest projects using horizontal directional drilling in such a fashion. It also is reflected in the amount of criminal charges they have that they did it wrong. It was very much so engineeringly probably embarrassing for its own industry, what they did here. So I started looking at it from a standpoint of as being a chemist who used to do water testing for the I'm certified basically in EPA water analytical methods. I've even modified them in my lab. I worked for the Department of Defense, the Army, just had a lot of experience on with it. And then I realized that people's water tests that were coming back were not being reported properly or even legally defendable because they were doing post or pre-drill, post-drilling, sometimes not even pre-drilling testing, like baseline testing. So people were like unable to go like legally in a court of law and say that it was actually the company that contaminated the water. However, we also had a lot of people with illnesses, rashes, eyes, like pink eye, dogs were having stomach problems. Animals and small children were the first to experience this. So what we found out is that they were introducing bacteria. And I'm an analytical chemist who's doing like the chemistry. And so everybody's really freaked out kind of because of what's going on in the hydraulic fracturing world out west, which they're using chemicals. But when you're dealing with horizontal directional drilling in pipelines, there is a law that they cannot use a lot of products, even though they're still protected under Halliburton loophole and oil and gas. The DEP requires them not to use the same types of lubricants or it has to be like water-based, water soluble or water-based lubricants versus like the free-for-all they're allowed to do out in frac land. So that was one thing that was a little frustrating because people were kind of fixated on looking for the chemicals that is in fracking. You could probably find traces because they're still using the same equipment, but nothing that would give a resident any indication that their water is safe or not safe to drink. What really was being neglected was the bacteriological aspect, which is actually a pathogenic bacteria. And that is that's literally the Department of Health's like purview. Like that is a major problem. And it just like what they call the Shiga toxin, which my family got from what we were thinking is the drilling. We have correlation, but we're in the middle of the Attorney General's settlement where they're testing our water now, after the fact forensics. So like, I just know that we all got sick and our water was fine. We never had to have a UV filter here. But it was correlative to their drilling. When they stopped drilling, it went down. When they started drilling, it went up. That has been seen throughout several homes, several properties, several neighborhoods. And since we are more of a, I would say, wealthier, privileged area, they settled with a whole neighborhood and got them water lines put in. So they got public water put into these houses. It was 60 homes. They all settled under non-disclosure and got like some extra money to pay for water now that they have to pay for water all year. So that was something I really got so mad at when there's like, the Woodlands, Dimmock, and these rural areas were environmental justice areas. Even like, I know that in Chester areas, they have public water. However, like seeing rural who have well water not having the same treatment, like just because there's like privileged lawyers involved that could afford it, these people got water lines put in through Aqua, who is also another company I have a problem with. They're associated to Energy Transfer and the fracking world. They supply water for fracking out west, southwest. So it's just like system that we're working against. And is there ever any justice in it, or is there ever any reparations or anything that is, remotely close to bringing people back to whole? Ever? Not anywhere in the testing that they're doing, including with the DEP, who was very complicit in that testing and said, they didn't find anything, yet their test results were just as inconsistent for these residents. So if they wanted to go to court and sue them, they would not win. There was nothing. That's what I kept saying. I'm like, you need to get the whole entire analytical report out of their system. The laboratory information system has it. They have to have that stuff in there. So ask for all of your results. This is taxpayer money. Like, you should get every piece of information you want. And they were unable to get that. They were handing them these like reports that are like cherry picked information out of the system. So it kind of got to a point where, the Attorney General came out and was like, okay, we're going to do a grand jury. And I testified on that. And I started realizing that he was just slapping them on the wrist with a fine by the end of it. And there was a settlement for us to have water. And, that's where I started water testing in this area on the Mariner East. But then I started seeing this widespread Pennsylvania issue with our DEP and how they're handling our water. There's no care for our water, no information. They don't study it properly. They don't even have an idea of how our groundwater system works here. And I'm talking to the geologist now that's now Governor Josh Shapiro has assigned to people like us in the Mariner East under the settlement. And he is the first person, this geologist is the first person to tell me that our geology, our bedrock is so unique. My neighbor's house, they could drill a well next to my house and it would be completely different than my house. That's like 100 feet away. So for them to sit there and like apply the DEP or even this company to go in with antiquated data and say it's safe to horizontally directional drill through something that they don't even understand is one of my biggest pet peeves in this. If you don't have the data to say it's safe, you cannot say it is safe just because you don't want to do the research. So my whole thing has been do the groundwater impact studies, do the full scale impact studies of everything. And let's like use the science we have at the tips of our fingers, and you have the money to do. And I'm sorry, what is the issue? Yeah, the time. The more time they take doing that, the more we as activists and grassroots people and organizations such as like PSR and other organizations have to organize. Because everybody knows they slap these things on us real quick and they just bombard us with all this information with a 30-day comment period. And then all of a sudden a permit and they're in your house, like, or in your backyard surveying, doing that, taking trees down, all during the process, keeping us so on our toes, where we kind of are scatterbrained and not having a very finite system of like understanding what is really going on, being fully informed as to what is going on first and foremost. I think it was Tammy who told me like one of those things, free prior informed consent. It's from indigenous attorneys that are fighting with the indigenous movement, like DAPL and whatnot. A beautiful like fight in my mind, because it is so true. Everybody deserves free prior informed consent. As to me, I'm a well owner, for example. We're responsible in the United States for the health and safety of our wells. Now, public water people are not, because they have a public system. The system like cleans it and they just have pipes. They might have to be responsible for everything from, the metering station outside their house, inside their house. They're responsible for all the pipes and whatnot. We're responsible for our wells, which is a really weird statement because our wells are drilled into the bedrock and look for an aquifer or some kind of, surface water or groundwater to tap off of. So our flow rate is matching to what the household needs. So we keep drilling until we meet that flow rate. And we can hit an aquifer. So now we're responsible. That well is just a hole drilled down into an aquifer. No, they don't protect, but we have no control over is that this aquifer could be huge. And there could be an organization or a corporation that's drilling into that same aquifer and the DEP permits it. They don't tell me. They don't have to tell me, but they're literally infiltrating the water where my well feeds from. So how am I like, I should have full ability for consent, free prior informed consent, meaning if you're going to do that into my water that my water is pulling from, then I should be a part of that decision making, because as soon as they do something wrong, I am now unable to prove that it's them. It would cost me millions in research just to figure out and like do all of the studies to prove it was the company or who was the permitting or it was somebody who did it, because they'll find every excuse in between, any gray door, anything of reasonable doubt, to harm, the homeowner. And, we also have the public water system coming in trying to be like, we'll just like give you public water and buy all the wells up. They're trying to buy our well water. And I'm a hard person that's going to stand up and say, no, we want to keep our well water and we want to change how the system works. We need to fully understand our groundwater system in order for people like me to be able to go to court and say, well, now that we have a full understanding of how the groundwater works here, I could prove that company who came in and drilled into my aquifer until that that it's possible it got here. Because as that geologist said, it's fractured, fissured, folded, compacted. It is so unique. There are so many cracks that you could like literally somebody could drill 10 miles down the road. And because there's a weird crack fissure or some kind of like underground stream, it could lead to mine if the flow rate works, if the flow direction is in it. And that's what I found with Mariner East. I'm a mile away. And now they're starting to believe me that, oh, they're like, it's impossible that it's coming from here. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm like, there's a complete fracture line that goes right into my aquifer, and it's at the depth of 270 feet. So you tell me what else could contaminate something at 200 something feet when the only people in the area that were drilling that deep was Mariner. So I was like, otherwise, we've never had a problem. So you'll have to tell me who's down at 200 feet or somebody's dumping it. You can't dump into an aquifer. It trickles through the ground and cleans. So they also use bentonite, which clogs those fissures that help recharge our aquifers. So that's another issue. Our well's going dry because now they lost 100,000 gallons of this stuff at Marsh Creek Lake when they spilled there. It was a big thing that Mariner East contaminated our lake that's right behind my house. And that stuff that they fined them for was actually what came to the surface. And that was only 20,000 gallons or 28,000, which they're starting to find out it's probably more. But they didn't mention the loss of circulation, which was 100,000 gallons. That's not even recovered, still somewhere underneath the ground. Probably blocking our fissures. That's what it does. It fills cracks and gaps and then expands. So what is that doing? So the impact 20 years from now, this company goes out, gets their pipes in. The settlement might only be a couple of years that it's validated for, but 20 years down the road, what happens when our wells start going dry? Because the recharge has been affected. We don't know where that stuff's been. So this is the kind of stuff I do. I use like what's called like forensics and the scientific method to push against these organizations, and especially our Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Health. There is a good practice in science and a bad practice in science. And all I'm seeing is bad practice and lack of logic in science at all. Don't tell a resident because we can't prove the company did it that there was nothing done, because that company has to prove they didn't do it. It's not our job to prove that they did it. We are only saying, with the limits we have, we're only trying to say is, our water changed. Like, we can tell you that you guys permitted somebody to infiltrate my aquifer without my consent, and you didn't do the studies to guarantee us that it's not going to harm us. And then you stamped it off and basically lied to the entire public by saying, yeah, it's safe. And they continue to say it's safe. And I'm like, you have to prove that it was, though. And we're starting to find out that we're proving that it wasn't. So it's just so it's constantly just, coming up. And I feel terrible for people who don't have a science background that have to deal with this. The lawyers take advantage of them. The DEP does, their townships, everybody, especially townships, because they don't necessarily have scientists. So they're like listening to these companies, like these big hoity-toity companies that have these professionals, but the professionals are not objective. They're not following good practice. They're just basically in the company, like contractors are isolated from each one of themselves. So like they only feed a little bit of information into, say, the drillers from their geologists, like, oh, you got to drill here, here's the profile and all this stuff. But they didn't tell them how much, like, that there could possibly be a high probability of sinkholes. In fact, they listed as low. And we had the most sinkholes, I think, ever in one neighborhood. There was like 20 from their drilling. So, I mean, and it's still listed on the reevaluation that it was a low probability. That's like not even taking empirical data. It's like they're still using theoretical data when they have empirical data, which is what is data. Like, it already happened. So now you got to calculate it in to your, new evaluation. They didn't do that. They're just like, let's just start over, wipe the slate clean. We're still going to say it's a low thing. And then they do it again. And I'm like, you can't fight the reality of nature. You cannot engineer nature. When you're going to figure that out, you can either study it and understand it and learn it and work with it, or you could just leave it alone, which I think it should be left alone. So my whole thing was to try to prove, as Wasipa, to just sit there day after day after day. And I'm telling you, it's like watching grass grow with a video and showing people, because they're like, oh no, they're doing fine. I'm like, not when my cameras are up. So we started getting people recording them in their house, like a video on a pole, watching them. Let me tell you how nervous they got. We caught them doing everything. So how ridiculous is these homeowners, and people have to constantly, as they have kids, work and have a life, normal stuff before these jerks came in. and and now they have to watch them on top of that, like watch them like babies because they're not doing it right. What Wasipa decided to do is, like, I was disabled in retired. So I had time. And I went out and did it for these families because their families were getting, there was so much trauma in this, and it would you could see that how it harmed the family unit and how it harmed the relationships. And so, like, I would just try and go in and say, get full permission, obviously knowing my rights. Like, I have to have the permission of the property owner. I know it's legal to record. And of course I give all of the information is first for the owner whose property I recorded on. And if it could help them in a legal case or anything, then I'd give it to them first, and if they wanted me to share it publicly, I'd, try to make something go viral to help get the attention of DEP or the, community or the government. But typically I would just go out there daily and check on everybody's sites and record as much as I could. And, so they could go up about their lives, because it was for 4 years. 4 years, people had these guys in their backyard. That's a long time. And people left their homes. Yeah, it's like one of the parts I don't think anybody talks about is the place disruption and the emotional geography almost, or the trauma in this. That is something I think needs to be an impact study done before these communities, especially in environmental justice communities who have already been bombarded, and there's so much trauma, historical trauma, legacy trauma, actually. And then you come in with a new project saying, oh, it's fine. I mean, they know it's not. It's never been fine to stack up an accumulative amount of pollution and look at each facility as its independent, like, little own thing in a community that's already been impacted. We're starting to see that here out in the suburbs with pipelines. We have some of the most it's crazy. Nobody even know, because they're like not refining as much anymore. Now that we have the petrochemical and the hydrogen hub, CCUS, and the, fracking and frac gas liquids, this place has become alive again. Our compressor stations are expanding. All of our infrastructure is expanding. So either there's a choice that we have to fight. Every community has to, get together and fight in their community the way that they feel comfortable fighting as a community. And as well, that we have to connect each community next to each other and work together as a system and make sure that we're all communicating, because they will isolate, compartmentalize, and attack us against each other. They will love to pull us against each other, like throw some kind of meat in the dog ring out here and do whatever they can to make us not communicate. Their worst nightmare is for all of us to be on the same page and working as a unit, versus like a bunch of pods, which they can come in and isolate us and throw meat into a dog ring, like a hungry ring of dogs. It's really that simple. They do that all the time. They have that kind of psychological operation, is what they basically survive on, and how they've gotten this down. It's basically a Ponzi scheme. I don't know. But to the point where you have, investors in the SEC federal trials that are like suing, the company because they were supposed to like care for the stakeholders, which we are, and they didn't. And shareholders have an inherent duty, because they're both stakeholders and shareholders. They have an inherent duty to stakeholders. And when they found out that the stakeholders here are being harmed that aren't shareholders, that's not the agreement they had in investing in this project or this company. So it's kind of interesting to watch investors starting to like retaliate and let the money fight the money, because we have no fight with that as residents. There's no way we could fight a multi-billion-dollar company, and that's why most lawyers won't pick our cases up. I would just have to continue taking data, and as soon as you get so much data, it's almost like, okay, like really, like it's like 110% you guys screwed up. Like, it's just really bad. And of course, Physicians for Social Responsibility knows that with the health impacts, we absolutely know there's no safe way to frack. It impacts our health in every part of the process. And for them to sit there and say, oh, we'll do it better or safer, like, how? It should be a zero impact on our health if it was safe. No community should be a sacrifice zone. Right. I mean, with people, why it was basically because here in Pennsylvania, and especially in Sumter, we really didn't have a massive organization of like watchdogs, meaning we were like fighting the legal and begging the oppressor, basically, which I kind of got sick of. And I think a lot of people here, and please don't get, I don't mean anything wrong, but it's they use the word NIMBY a lot, not in my backyard. Well, it's not necessarily NIMBY. I think it's that they're just not aware of like how our government actually behaves. And they think that they're there for them still. But when you get up to your government and they say their hands are tied, you're like, wait, huh? How? You know, you're supposed to represent us. You're supposed to protect our health and safety. And we found out people just go to like the PUC, the DEP, and like go to court cases, and they were getting ruled against. I'm like, did you actually look up the judges? Because yeah, they have a conflict of interest. They work for Buchanan, Ingersoll, Rooney. They're not going to rule against us. We're screwed at every level here. And I'm like, so stop begging the oppressor. When you start realizing the oppression, we're all in a state of oppression. And this is just, we're just seeing in suburbia the awareness of it. And I don't think, it's almost like it's hard to swallow. It's a grief process of like thinking that you knew like what you thought, you thought you were safe. You thought that just because you're in like everything's within 15 minutes in suburbia and everything's happy here, everything's fine, then your bubble pops. And you start to realize, wait, we're not fine. You mean there's pollution in our bubble? You mean wait, I don't own my property? They could take it at any time. They could put me at risk, my children at risk at a school. How is that possible? That's not legal. And I think being next to Chester and Marcus Hook, Chester has wonderful organizing, like Philly Thrives, great at organizing. It's just that, you know, we have not supported out here as much where we need it to be. They needed our help in so many ways, and we're right next. And so like, I've been doing my best in trying to get involved, and other groups have been, in my opinion, some of these EJ communities are the ones who have the best knowledge, because they've been fighting this for so long and they understand exactly what it takes. And it takes all of us. And it's absolutely all of us. And it can't be like, oh, Chester County fights itself for itself. Chester County has to go and fight for the Southeastern corridor with everybody. We all have to do this together. And so I have learned so much by involving myself in groups like Circle and watching some of the trainings that Philly Thrive and actions that Philly Thrive has done, that it's changed my entire perspective of everything, especially out in Southwestern Pennsylvania, out in, you know, the Gulf South. Like this, hearing the same stories over and over again. It's no different here. We're just kind of isolated. We've kept ourselves isolated because we haven't been. It was surprising at first, but now I'm used to it. I'm like, nah, it's anywhere they go, it's going to be the same story. It's just how they look at you as in a dynamic as like for suburbia, they knew that they could put signs up that said road work when they were actually doing pipeline work. And people would just like think, oh, road work, it's construction, it's improvements of our roads, it's our tax dollars being used. But I'm like, did you see them on the road at all? Did you look up and see that there was no road work? It was in people's neighborhoods. They'd pass that every day. This county and Delaware County were the only two counties across the state that had no pipeline construction signs. I went across the state and saw it right in Berks County. And I called that out to PennDOT. And I'm like, why are they misinforming the public? They have pipeline construction signs. Let the people in this area know that it's pipeline construction that they're doing, not road work, so that they might look up and help us organize, you know, a little bit. That's fair. They didn't do it. You know what they did? Right on my road, this you can just for yourself, these jackasses put a pipeline construction sign right outside of my road when they started working on one of the pipelines. Like, it was just a slap in the face. That was the company itself that did that. Like, psh, we're in control here. It's like a psyop. And I'm like, wow. And so, because I got phone calls from people, they're like, there's a pipeline construction sign on your street. I'm like, of course there was, because I was the one complaining about it. So they're like, what, is that going to shut me up? No. But if it didn't screw me up, I was just like, it showed me how they don't give a crap about us. They think it's a game. You know, they're willing to mess with your head, mess with your life, and mess with, like, put your children and your health at risk, and that all for money. And it's scary to see that. So, I don't know. We just did WSEPA because the only thing I know is that if you collect the real evidence, it's really hard to argue against videos time-stamped, proper stamped, like to get the evidence. That's just where I ended up understanding, like, I had to fight. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have the money. I'm not like an organizer either. I'm not necessarily a great organizer. So this is what I could do for my part. So we created WSEPA to focus on that. And I was hoping that it would, catch on. And it seems like watchdogs are really kind of a major force right now in these fights, even so that the EPA is actually starting to take citizen science as a part of their, methane rules, that we're allowed to go out and like take evidence, and they're going to consider our evidence in fining or, investigating these companies. Whereas like, even our DEP would never even look at our evidence. But I mean, the AG did, he took all of it when he did his grand juries. It's just, when we are watchdogs, we're actually eyes and ears. If they're under budget, understaffed, then we're an extension of them. Why not use us? Like, as long as we are following proper procedures of documenting. It's not hard. Can't really like mess up when you have timestamp, GPS stamp, or anything like that has like a system that is, solid and as standard. Like, why would you not take that? It's not like I like messed with the numbers and like, I can't lie. It's there. It's just take it and investigate, because they never get out there in time. Like it's a very acute event, right? And then we're like, well, we come out the next day. We're like, well, there's nothing here. I'm like, yeah, it stopped raining. The erosion and sediment control was failing during the rain. Now it's all in the water. What? Protect the water is your job. Department of Environmental Protection, not Department of Environmental Fining. Like, what the heck? Like, do your job. And if you can't, let us help you.